Hi there and welcome to the podcast. I am so delighted to have Dr. Robert Paarlberg, pardon me if I didn't pronounce that correctly, here. And Professor Paarlberg was in the poli-sci department at Wellesley when I was at Wellesley. And so I majored in econ, but he was downstairs and I was upstairs. And Dr. Paarlberg has written this absolutely fascinating book called Resetting the Table. And I saw it and I read an excerpt from it, I think in a Harvard publication. And I was like, I have to ask him to come onto the podcast. So Professor, would you please introduce yourself to the podcast audience, give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll just get to it.
Okay, Michelle, it's great to be on your podcast. I'm a retired professor of political science at Wellesley College. I'm currently at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. I'm an associate in the Sustainability Science program at the Kennedy School. Also, I'm an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. I have written considerably over the years about international food and agriculture. I think this is my 10th book, which is, I don't know if it's my last one or not, but most of them have touched on aspects of global food and agriculture. I've worked occasionally with the International Agricultural Research System, the CGIAR. Mm-hmm. I've done consulting work for the U.S. Agency for International Development, for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I've spent quite a bit of time working in Africa, but this book is focused more on the food system in the United States and what's broken about the system and how we can fix it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it was a completely fascinating read. So the book is called Resetting the Table. If you have not gone and read it, you should go read it because I think that it's an incredibly important conversation as we are moving into what's going to be essentially a once in a lifetime opportunity to look at actually resetting our table with the money that's coming from the government and all different initiatives and things like that. And we can do it well or we can do it poorly. I think we all would like to do it well. So one of the, I picked up the book after reading the excerpt in the Harvard Journal, and the excerpt is from, I guess, chapter 2 that talks about organic and the organic labeling and movement and some of that stuff. And I was fascinated because I work in relocalization of agriculture, re-regionalization of American agriculture, which is not presented in a great light in your book. I think in large part because of inadequacy of the volume produced. But as somebody who comes out of the econ department, we always talk about individually rational decisions. Why do you think people are choosing to re-regionalize agriculture anyway, and to look at more regional systems?
Well, some are, but they're still in a very small minority. The U.S. Department of Agriculture publishes a census of agriculture, which maps out every aspect of food production in the country. And the latest census of agriculture counted up the total farm sales that were made directly at farmers markets or through CSAs or roadside stands or pick your own, or farm to table through restaurants or farm to school, mm-hmm. And also through regional food hubs, everything that didn't go through the supermarket grid.
Sure.
And it added up to less than 2% of total farm sales in the United States. So yes, there's been some growth in the local sector, but it still doesn't represent more than a low single digit of the total system. And if you look at the larger trend, it's not toward localization, it's still toward globalization. Mm-hmm. In 1990, 11% of the food that Americans consumed was imported. Now it's closer to 20%. So the larger trend is away from localization, and why is that? I mean, I think it's being driven mostly by consumer preferences. Consumers want convenience, and they want choice, and they want affordability. And when it comes to convenience, nothing beats a supermarket, especially when you can now order home delivery as easily as you can. When it comes to affordability, nothing beats a supermarket. When it comes to choice, also you have to go beyond local to get the full range of choice that most consumers expect. Most consumers today expect to be able to get fresh fruits and vegetables year round, 12 months of the year. They want tropical products 12 months of the year. That means that's what's driving the increase in imported foods. Right now, the United States imports 50% of its fruit consumption. It imports a third of its vegetable consumption. If we didn't have those imports, dietary health in America would be even worse than it is. So until you can persuade consumers that they should spend a lot more time shopping and spend more money shopping for a more narrow range of choice, I don't think you're going to relocalize our food system very much.
So I think that's interesting because that does get to the points at the back of the book about the relationship between big food and big ag, and how that it's an uneasy relationship, but boy is it one that nobody's looking to break anytime soon, at least from the writing in the book and then from my experience. And if you're looking at that, I mean, most of my listeners have rejected that system and are making simpler, more artisanal foods that are doing, like, may incorporate 20% of imported. You know, you can't make a really amazing finocchiona, which is a type of salami, without imported spices. That's like not possible. Even if you make it from locally sourced pork, right? I mean, the vast majority of the garlic in America, even the organic garlic, no longer comes from Gilroy, California. It comes from China. And so if we look at it, I think that's what a lot of people are doing. And do you see this idea of smaller portions and more and smaller portions and higher quality food? That's not going to take over the entire conversation. This is America, after all. we are the land of the big gulp, right? Which is, I think, an entire day's worth of sugar in one soft drink. But do you see that as being any part of a viable part of the conversation? And if not, why not?
Well, of course, it's a big part of the conversation. Quality conscious food consumers are trying to persuade their fellow Americans to move in an eat less and higher quality food direction. And it's advice that we badly need to heed. If you look at, I mean, one marker for dietary health in America is obesity prevalence, and it's now 42% among American adults clinically obese. That's 3 times the level of the 1960s. That's up 30% from just 2 decades ago. And it brings a huge burden of chronic disease, especially type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We desperately need to change the way that we're eating. But the trend lines suggest that we really aren't changing that much. We've reduced the consumption of sugar sweetened beverages, but it's still much too high. The consumption of red meat per capita is down considerably from the 1970s, but has been replaced by by other meat products. So our meat consumption is still too high for personal health. We just haven't moved fast enough in the direction that your quality conscious audience would prefer. And what's the reason for that? It's not the high price of better food. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has put together what it calls its Thrifty Food Plan. Mm-hmm. It's a collection of foods that, for a family of four, will meet all of the dietary guidelines, including for fresh fruits and vegetables. And you can purchase this thrifty food package for the equivalent of $2 a meal, mm-hmm. which is essentially nothing. Right. So why don't more people follow the Thrifty Food Plan and get away from the more expensive, and they are more expensive per portion, ultra-processed foods that are driving our diet in the wrong direction, with too much added sugar, too much salt, too much fat. It turns out we're back to the convenience issue again. It's preparation time. The Thrifty Food Plan expects more than 2 hours of food preparation time for that family of four every day. And on average, American households spend less than 1 hour, less than half of the preparation time that's required for the Thrifty Food Plan. So we prefer, out of convenience, and because we all have microwave ovens, to purchase foods that have already been processed, that you can just heat in the oven and throw away the package, and you don't even have any pans to clean up. I guess it indicates that your audience has a long way to go before they convince their fellow citizens of the importance of eating better and eating less. It's a struggle that I hope we win eventually. I think we're going to need a nudge from the government to win this struggle. I think we're going to need excise taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages, not just in half a dozen municipalities around the country, but at the state or eventually the federal level. I think we're going to need a mandatory nutrition guidance on the front of packaged food goods, not just a nutrition facts panel on the side that's all fine print and small numbers. I think we need at-a-glance nutrition guidance, something like the system in the UK, which is a traffic light system. If the sodium bar is red, you know you're going to get too much salt if you purchase that product. We need something like that. And I would like to see at least guidelines that would block the advertisement of junk foods to children. I have a long list of things that I would like to see that we're not close to doing. In Europe, they do these things. In Europe, 18 different countries have at least one of these policies in place, and Europe has obesity prevalence rates only half as high as our own. So we have a huge distance to go before your audience can say that its fellow citizens out there have accepted the desirability of eating less and eating better.
Well, and I think, when we talk about the affordability part of it and the convenience part of it, one of the issues that is out there is that most of my clients would like to make more convenient foods as a portion of the basket of goods that they're putting in the marketplace, right? Finocchione is never going to be a convenience food, nor should it be. But one of the issues that I saw in the book is it seems like there is this assumption about a level playing field in the regulations. And the ability for a big company, and I have audited, so I don't know if we talked about this, but I was a food safety auditor in the Army. That's what the veterinarians do in the US Army. We're the Department of Defense executive agent for food safety. And I have audited, the smallest food trucks feeding Fort Hamilton at the foot of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in New York, all the way to the company that makes those little tiny bottles of Tabasco sauce that go into the MREs, all the way to the M&M plant in Hackettstown, New Jersey, which makes the M&Ms for the MREs. So I've like been to all the sizes. And the regulatory burden is substantially different. And when you're making like a convenience food, we think of it as ready to eat. And all foods that are ready to eat and have to have in America have to have a control for listeria. And that the way we regulate listeria in the United States, we do this like what we call hazards-based regulation versus over in Europe where they do risk-based regulation. So in Europe, the listeria in cheese can be at what we call 10 colony forming units per gram. So you are allowed to have listeria in cheese in France, and you are not allowed to have listeria in cheese in the United States. Now, more people die of listeria in France, and that's the trade-off that they've been willing to make, and we're generally not willing to make those trade-offs. But how do you, like, looking at the examples that you have around lab-grown meat and some of the other examples, I mean, I think probably especially around lab-grown meat, there is an inequality in access to policy channels to make those regulations. And then there is what we call a relative over-inspection, okay, of small meat plants in particular. I have one friend who he has 3 inspectors in his plant every single day, and the gigantic hog packer up the road that kills, that's probably under hemp, which is the company sets the line speeds and does all their own inspection, which he is regulatorily not allowed to do. Probably is now at this point running 200 hogs a minute. And he doesn't do 200 hogs a week. And he has 3 inspectors, and they, under hemp, may now have 1 or 2. And so he can't make a convenience food. So what do we do about that for these small processors so they can compete?
Yeah, it's regulatory hurdles, which usually entail paperwork, are inherently more burdensome for very small operators than for very large operators. The last thing a small livestock producer or a small grower needs is paperwork. and I think that's been recognized at times. There was a new food safety law passed by Congress, I think in 2010.
2011.
2011, thank you. And it was held up for a long time because small local producers thought it was going to be disadvantageous to them. The big operators would have no trouble with the added inspections and paperwork, but it would be a killer for them. So they held out. They and their friends in Congress held out until they got an exemption. If you're small enough and if you're selling food locally enough, you're exempt from some of the requirements of that law. And I think I think the safety of our food system is already high enough that we can fully afford that kind of exemption for small producers. I know those exemptions aren't extended everywhere, but I don't know if you're ever going to make it as easy for small operators to measure up to high regulatory standards as it is for larger operators with more specialized operation, with larger professional staff, with better training. How is a small farmer selling at the farmer's market ever going to be able to give the personnel who go to the farmer's market and put the food out on the stand the same kind of professional food safety training that that you get if you're running the meat counter at a supermarket.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's kind of half of why I'm in business, but that's what we do around here. And we've spent a lot of time talking about FSMA, which is that law, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And what is interesting, and my clients come up to this all the time, is we did get those exemptions in there. You're still not allowed to sell adulterated food. Like, you still can't kill somebody with your food, exemption or otherwise. But what I find very interesting, and which was kind of the natural, this was already happening before FSMA was enacted, was that the marketplace was going towards a solution. And now we have these, do you know what the ISO system is? Yeah, so now we have all of these ISO compliance system, like the Global Food Safety Initiative schemes, that are required to get in anyway. And so you have this level of regulatory compliance, but then you have market expectations, right? And your food has to, I tell my people, your food has to solve a problem for your customer, and sometimes that comes at the expense of.
You're making an important point. I said we have a high level of safety in our food system, and we do, but I don't think it's because of governmental regulations. I think it's because operators who put food on the market in the United States know that they will be badly punished if they put contaminated or toxic product in front of the innocent customer in the marketplace. They know that we have vigorous investigative journalists out there who will track down the source of the contamination. They know that we have plenty of highly litigious lawyers who are eager to get a class action lawsuit against any company that puts a dangerous product in the marketplace. They know that they will be punished badly if they make that mistake, and so they invest heavily in hazard analysis and critical control point processes. It came out of private industry; it didn't come out of the government. And these are the expensive but very effective systems that are used to keep our food supply safe. Usually governmental regulations lag behind what private industry in its own self-interest is pressured to do.
Right. And there is, the HACCP system did come out of Pillsbury and NASA, and then we had the mega reg after the Jack in the Box, and that was the 96 Pathogen Reduction Act, which made HACCP mandatory in meat plants. And what I find super interesting is under the new Food Safety Modernization Act, we still don't know the farm where the romaine outbreaks happened. They haven't named, like the FDA, there was a carve out for not naming the farms, which I find very, very interesting, because parallel to that, we have these two food safety systems. We have the FDA side of the house, the USDA side of the house. And over on the USDA side of the house, at the same time as FSMA was coming out, they were putting out these performance standards for Salmonella and Campylobacter, right? And they were going to publish names. But when the big houses stopped being able to pass, they stopped publishing the names. They were all good publishing the names of the small houses, and I think there are 6 small U.S. poultry plants left. And they were published, but the big houses were not. So there is a definite uneven application of regulatory infrastructure. And then that gets into my next question. We talk about increasing in meat consumption, and we grow 30 chickens for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And that goes under a contract grow system, which I'm sure you're familiar with GIPSA and the contract grow infrastructure that we have. And I was fascinated to see that was not part of your analysis, because that is the way we grow chickens and hogs, because those are also contract grows here in the United States, has a lot to do with the availability of all of that protein at the prices that they are at. When I was in most of my vet degree is from Georgia, and I used to go to Kroger and look at 39-cent chicken thighs. Well, I was also a secretary at St. Joe's in Athens, and we did a lot of Hispanic ministry, and there's a very high cost to 39-cent a pound chicken wings or chicken thighs. Where did gypsum not come into it? Was that too far into the weeds, or where did that level of analysis not make it into the book?
Yeah, well, I had a chapter on animal agriculture, and it focused heavily on productivity and on animal welfare. It didn't go deeply into marketing and processing. I did, however, point out that in both broiler chickens and in hogs, and of course in egg-laying hens, we've gone from pasture and barnyard systems into automated indoor concentrated animal feeding operations, and we did that mostly to reduce labor costs in the industry, and those labor costs were dramatically reduced by specialization and by automation and by confinement. We also did it because demand for animal products was increasing so rapidly. We consume 5 times as much meat now as we did in 1940. It would have been physically impossible. It would have been environmentally dangerous to try to increase the amount of meat 5-fold using the methods that were still in place in 1940. The best way for an industry that's growing that rapidly to acquire the high volume of animal products on time and at a consistent quality standard, the best way to do that is contract farming. We've learned with that many live animals, you have to have a contractual relationship. In the old days, the farmer would herd the animals to town once a week and put them up for sale in the live market. Well, living animals can't be marketed that way in the volume that's required today, so we have contract farming. I think the legitimate concern is that once you have a contract farming, is the industry too concentrated, either for the welfare of the final consumer, and that apparently isn't the case because of those very cheap chicken legs the final consumer can get from this system, but is it maybe too concentrated for the welfare of the producer, and here it may depend upon whether you've made an investment in being the kind of producer that thrives in this market model, or were you a small independent producer who got squeezed out because you didn't make the investment, or you didn't have the resources to make the investment, or you didn't want to transition into this kind of contract production system. My book, I think, mentions that in one county in Indiana, where I interview a hog farmer, there used to be 100 hog farms. Now there are only 3. And there is more concentration in the industry, and there are many fewer small independent livestock producers. But my guess is that's mostly driven by the much higher volume of production that the market is demanding today, and the impossibility of sourcing that much from from 100 separate small independent producers.
Right. And there's big issues in there. But again, it gets back to this idea of privatizing the profit and socializing the cost. There's a huge cost that's associated with concentrated animal feeding operations. And, for example, the hog houses in Iowa don't pay taxes, right? And yet they have these manure lagoons that are challenging in the extreme to the environment and to the local population. And I think that I don't know if you would agree with this, but I don't think that the cost of all of the inputs goes into the actual cost of the food.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not an economist, and I haven't studied this the way an economist would. I do know that these concentrated animal feeding operations have captured some dramatic efficiency gains. Feed use efficiency is now so high that you can produce much more meat with fewer animals, many fewer animals. And that results in less manure and less urine and less waste. And for every pound of production, less pollution. Someone did a calculation based on modern dairy systems in the United States compared to traditional dairy systems. And because of improved genetics and because of improved feed and because of some confinement, the burden on the climate, the greenhouse gas signature of a glass of milk today is actually 2/3 smaller than it was in 1950. So I don't think that these operations are more wasteful than traditional systems, or even more polluting for every pound of production. They're actually less polluting. The problem is, here's back to your eating less solution. We're consuming 5 times as much meat today as we did in 1940. It's not the way these operations produce meat, it's the volume of meat they're producing that is generating the environmental damage. I think we have to find, maybe this connects to your lab meat question, where we're still looking for good ways to reduce our dependence on live animals to satisfy our appetite for meat or for meat-like products. And in my book, I examine the options of both plant-based and lab-grown meat. Plant-based products are moving fast. Impossible Foods increased its production of Impossible Burgers 6-fold in the last year. And even with that growth, you'd think they'd be raising their prices, but no, they cut their prices twice. They want to replace beef patties in the marketplace, and they're trying to price their product to do that. If they are successful, I think there'll be some considerable social benefits. The greenhouse gas burden of an Impossible Burger is 90% less than that of a real beef patty from a methane belching cow. The human medicine benefit could be considerable. We don't use antibiotics for Impossible Burgers. We do use antibiotics in a lot of our livestock production systems, and that puts at risk, because of antimicrobial resistance, that puts at risk the efficacy of some antibiotics used in human medicine. And then, of course, there's the animal welfare issue, which is very important to me. If we're worried about the way we treat animals, why not find a substitute for animals? Find another technology for satisfying our appetite. The fashion industry found ways to make imitation fur so they wouldn't have to kill and skin animals.
We call that plastic.
The shoe industry came up with imitation leather products. So why can't the food industry come up with imitation animal products? We're doing it already. 13% of the fluid milk market now is plant-based milk from almonds or coconuts or rice. We have plant-based imitation eggs. I think it's, I would like to see more substitution for animal products using modern science. I'm a little bothered, not while we're on this subject, to see so many progressive food movement activists rejecting plant-based imitation meats.
Mm-hmm.
And why do they do that? Well, they don't like them for two reasons. First, they're corporate, and second, they're processed. I don't like ultra processed foods. They're not good for you, but processed foods by themselves don't have to be a problem. They certainly don't have to be, in my mind, a deal breaker when it comes to evaluating the benefits, the multiple benefits you could get from a plant-based meat substitute.
I think that's super interesting because in my head we have, like the plant-based meat substitutes and the non-dairy milks and that sort of thing. And they are, they're regulated pretty much. I mean, you make non-dairy milk almost the same way you make dairy milk. I've been to both kinds of plants, right? But then when we look at those lab-grown meats and things like that, because of the regulatory playing field is so different, how are we going to go and regulate those? And then it gets to the question, actually, this kind of combines two questions that I wanted to ask you. It gets to a question of sovereignty. There are people who think that the natural extension of plant-based meats and lab-grown meats is that it becomes illegal for us to grow our own food. It becomes illegal for us to keep our own animals because the risk is too high. It's already illegal in many, many states, yours and mine, not the one I just came from, to have raw milk. There are some very, very large, like you get huge fines in some states for having raw milk, because that's what we did is we took our dairying system, which had lots of public health problems. I mean, I am a veterinarian. I totally get tuberculosis and brucellosis, and raw milk is like a thing, right? But then we created this whole milk system that then makes this kind of like small milk illegal. It's illegal. They made 15 gallon vat pasteurizers for the interstate milk shippers list illegal. And so we look at this lab grown meat that has huge corporate backing in ways that my friends are never going to have to re-regionalize local food systems, and a massively uneven regulatory infrastructure where if you're growing meat, why isn't FSIS up in your face all the time? Because the risk of cross-contamination is real. I've done drug manufacturing. I used to be in preclinical trials and lab animal medicine. What does it look like if we even out the playing field by making those lab-grown meats adhere to CGMPs, which are, certified good manufacturing practices, which is much more of a nutraceutical or a pharmaceutical standard? You know what I mean? Because then that.
Yeah, well, you're out ahead of me on this particular topic, and in a sense, we're out ahead of the industry itself. The Food and Drug Administration hasn't yet approved the marketing of any lab-grown meat. It's been, I think, tentatively approved in Singapore. Mm-hmm. But these products they're not yet close to the price point that they're going to have to hit to have a significant market. I think the chicken nugget that was sold in Singapore cost $23 a nugget.
Right, right. And then you hear about the $20,000 hamburger and that sort of thing. But I think that I think that I don't disagree with you that that future is coming, but then the question is how do we create a balance so that people's right to grow their own food isn't infringed upon, and where do we get this, like it's almost the public health conversation around it is not one that we really know how to have.
Well, yeah, we had it. We had it more than 100 years ago when we introduced pasteurization, and it was a tremendous public health victory. It made the supply much safer than it had been before. And I mean, I would want to think twice before reversing that victory. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that if you eat unpasteurized cheese, you're not going to die. The Frenchmen are not dropping dead in the streets because they don't pasteurize their milk when they make cheese. But we've had a pretty intense public health conversation over things like social distancing and mask wearing, and now we're having it over vaccination. I wouldn't want to be any less public health conscious when it comes to the dairy industry than I would when it comes to vaccination and to virus avoidance.
Right. And I think that I get that, but I would also say that, when we look at meat and we look at dairy, one, we have to worry about the black market. So, our last brucellosis outbreak, raw milk, was black market raw milk. Interstate shipments of black market raw milk, which just like boggles the mind on the logistics of how you actually do that. But then the other part of it is that, milk is, last time I looked at the paper last week, commodity milk is trading at about $17 a hundredweight. Organic milk usually varies between $35 and $45 a hundredweight. And raw milk can be up around $90 a hundredweight. And there are positive public health goods when milk is sold at $90 a hundredweight, because kids go to the dentist, and there are upgrades and improvements. But I think we don't know how to have those conversations, and I don't think that we know how to have those conversations about lab grown meat or the processing of plant-based meats, and having an inclusive conversation so that we can see where are we paying the cost and what is a socially acceptable cost, and what is where and what are we not paying the cost of, and again getting back to who's benefiting and at what price.
No, that's well said.
Thanks. And so what do you see? So where do you see this in, like as we look at the economies opening back up and things like that, do you see any massive changes coming along, or what are your circles saying?
Well, some trends that were already underway have been accelerated by the pandemic, including online food purchases and home delivery. That's going to be a much larger share of consumer retail behavior than it was even before the pandemic. It was growing rapidly. Now it's going to be a larger share still. A lot of wonderful local independent restaurants have gone out of business and may never come back. And the risk is that they will be replaced by large national food service chains, which will offer food that's less interesting and probably less tasty and less healthful than something that a dedicated independent restaurant owner would put out there. Otherwise, I'm not sure that we're going to see dramatic differences. What fascinates me is how little disruption there was in the food and farming sector in the United States during the pandemic. Partly that's because agriculture was designated an essential sector, And so the lockdowns did not extend deeply into our production or processing system. We had some emergency shutdowns in pork processing in particular because of infections in the big plants. And yet, by the end of the year, total pork production in the United States was actually higher in 2020 than it had been for an average of the 5 previous years. So that wasn't much of a disruption. Trade was scarcely affected at all. U.S. agricultural imports and exports both increased in 2020. Agricultural commodity trade now is so highly automated that there's very little human contact. It's all containers and barges, and there isn't much of a workforce involved. And so it doesn't have to be shut down for public health reasons the way small markets in developing countries had to be shut down. It's so because we exempted agriculture from the lockdowns, we managed to avoid, I think, the kind of sector changing disruptions that you've seen in other places, including some of that high-priced real estate in the financial sector in New York City, and including universities. These are going to change dramatically. The lockdown, they've learned that people don't all have to be in the same room at the same time to get things done.
True that. And we ourselves are not in the same room at the same time. And with that, we got to end because you and I both have days to go. So thank you so much, Professor Paarlberg, for being here. The book is Resetting the Table, straight talk about the food we grow and eat. Tell everybody how to get in touch with you if they're so inclined, or anything else you want to add.
Okay, well, I still have an email address from my Wellesley College days. I think Michelle does as well.
Me too.
Mine is rpaarlberg at Wellesley, WELLESLEY.edu.
Excellent. And we will include that in the show notes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Paarlberg. You have an excellent rest of your day. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.